Goeiedag! Good day, fellow South Africans and citizens of the world.
I've been looking around for salvation. I've been looking around for the truth. All around me I see frustration, and I looked all over till I found you. I sit and listen to your stories, and you're telling me, please don't worry. So lot in this world you should know, and love in life is where you should go. If you're looking for somewhere to go, if you're looking for someone to know, if you're looking for someone to guide you, then love in life will guide you. I know that life outside is so hard.
Goeienaand, good evening fellow South Africans and citizens of the world, and welcome to tonight's live stream. Now, when you get on a passenger plane and the engines fire up, your life is in the hands of the pilots. The most dangerous part of any flight is taking off and, of course, landing. Despite these dangers, flying is by far the safest form of travel, much safer than being a pedestrian in a city or driving a car. But because of the environment, things can very easily go wrong, as they have been lately on South African Airways. Tonight I talk to two aviation experts, both expat South Africans, now living in Australia. Colin Weir, and I've spoken to Colin before on Loving Life TV, and Johann Smuts, who is in his 90s but still active in this area. Before I get them on, I just want to play you a little video clip of what went down at Warsaw recently with South African Airways, and we will be discussing this particular subject tonight. Let's have a look at that.
Hello and welcome. Let's take a look at our top story this hour. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa led African peace mission to Ukraine and Russia has begun with a controversial incident. The South African media is reporting a standoff between Polish authorities and the presidential security staff at the Warsaw airport. The head of Presidential Protection Service claimed that Polish authorities were demanding original permits from the security detail and the media contingent. He alleged racism and said that such an incident has never happened before. He said the South African government obtained all the necessary permits and had been engaging with the Polish government for 2 weeks.
They are delaying us, right? They're putting out the life of our president in jeopardy because we could have been in Kiev this afternoon already, right? And this is what they are doing. And I want you guys to see this, right? How racist they are. When we started to open the packages, right? They wanted to rush, right? To confiscate our firearms. That's why we had to put it back.
Major General Wally Roda had claimed that they encountered issues when their cargo was being unloaded. He alleged that Polish authorities harassed them and wanted to confiscate the cargo, due to which the South African contingent reportedly loaded it back onto the plane. Meanwhile, South African President Ramaphosa is leading an African peace mission to Ukraine and Russia. The mission comprises the leaders of South Africa, Zambia, Congo, Egypt, Senegal, and Uganda. They arrived in Poland on Thursday, where Ramaphosa was received by the Polish President Andrzej Duda. Now, on the eve of the mission, President Ramaphosa said the human and negative economic impact and tension arising from the conflict between Ukraine and Russia is a grave situation that affects all of us in an interconnected world. Now, Ramaphosa reached Kiev on Friday to hold talks with President Zelensky. After this, Ramaphosa will head to St. Petersburg in Russia, where he will meet with President Putin and engage in with his Russian counterpart.
I guess you get the gist of what they're talking about there. And let me just get rid of that. Okay, I'm going to get our guests on. That's Colin and Johann. And let's get the show on the road. We have had some problems with Johann's Skype, but Colin's been good. We'll just see how we go with Johann. Here we go. Hi, Colin.
Hi, Scott.
How are you, buddy?
I'm very well, and how are you?
Excellent, except there you are. Now I see you. Perfect. Now I'm just going to try Johann. He was able to appear on his mobile phone, and I've suggested that he uses his mobile phone because his laptop is definitely not working.
Yeah. Is your video working? I can't see your video. Eh?
Yeah, you won't see me because I'm actually my video's captured by my streaming software, but I can hear you and see you fine.
Okay, good.
Okay, Johann, I'm just waiting for him here. I think he's come in. Hi, Johann. I've got it. Something's happening, but yeah. All right. Well, look, if we can't get Johann on, we'll just fly solo.
Yeah. We'll just do it like that. He should be able to get on. It might be that he's a bit slow with the connection on his phone, but
sure.
Just give him a moment. He might get on okay, but otherwise we'll just do it. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's kick off this subject. What we're talking about tonight is really the changing safety standards that are taking place in the aviation industry as a overall sort of subject, but. We're going to be talking about a couple of specific incidents involving South African Airways. And what I'd like to do is to start off with that one that happened during COVID when a South African Airways flight, I think it was an A340, was flying into Belgium. And they were picking up some COVID-related stuff, I think 90 tons miscalculation when they took off. Do you want to tell us what actually went on there, Colin?
Yes. You're talking about the A340 with the overload situation?
Yes.
Okay. So what actually happened there was that the aircraft in question came in off another flight, and there was a changeover of the flights to use that one to go to Belgium. And in the process, the FMS, the flight management system, that had been set for the incoming flight was not cleared because apparently they had an APU failure, auxiliary power unit failure, or something along those lines. And because there was this power changeover from the APU to the generator, the issue came about that the new FMS details that had been entered were then erased, and it inadvertently fell back to the original incoming flight with all the weight and balance details that were relevant to that flight. So they did not cross-check it, and it inadvertently took off with these differing weights. And that's where the issue came in with the overload,
right?
Underload, in fact.
Now, what's the danger of that? Because I never realized that when you get on a passenger plane, they've got to calculate what the weight of the plane is. I thought they just took off.
No, the weight on an aircraft is absolutely critical. There's a video of a 747 that took off somewhere with pallets in the freight section that weren't tied down correctly, and as the nose lifted, the pallet slipped to the back of the aircraft. It went out of CFG limits, and it was uncontrollable because you don't have enough trim availability to trim the aircraft then nose down to fly, and it then stalled, went into the ground, and it was only a crew complement on board, but everybody was killed.
Wow. Okay. And
so it's critical, and I'll just add, which hasn't sort of come about in the news all that clearly, is that if that aircraft had crashed and it was in a very, very dangerous, dire situation, it would have gone into the built-up areas around Oliver Tambo Airport.
wow. Oh, that's shocking.
Yeah.
Now, more recently, we had a situation where Ramaphosa took off to go and sort out the war in Ukraine, which was a dismal failure, unsurprisingly. But his plane got detained at Warsaw. And, perhaps you can tell us why it was detained and what was the issue with the stuff that they had on the plane.
Well, with reference to the news reports, because we obviously didn't do any direct incident investigation into this, so our information comes from the news reports, and just to mention that any incident or accident, and the accidents that we're involved with, like the Jetstream one at Louis Bouda Airport, that's on our Facebook and LinkedIn site, we're very careful to.
Sorry, guys, I'm not sure what happened there, but I'll get Colin back. Here we go. Hi, Colin.
Yeah, I'm back online.
Yeah, we lost you there for a second.
Yeah, I don't know why that happened, but anyway, I don't know how far I got.
We got to basically about 5 seconds ago.
Okay, so I was saying that any aviation accident incident and the incidents that we're involved with, and serious incidents, they should be investigated objectively, unemotionally, without apportioning blame. That's a typical methodology in investigating these incidents or accidents. So our information, as I was saying, comes from news reports. We weren't directly involved in this. If we were to have got involved in this sort of investigation, we look at it not from a political or an emotional perspective. We look at it absolutely from flight safety and from the facts. And the issue is that the facts that we look at have to be backed up to some degree by reliable news reports or first-hand information. So in this case, there are a lot of issues with this flight, and if I analyze it from our perspective, as we would do, looking at we use a system called HFACS, Human Factors Assessment and Compliance, and we look at the HFACS issues that are involved with this. So, for example, we would start with this. We would say, in the first instance, what was the objective of this trip? Did the group realistically hope to influence or bring about changes in the Russian-Ukraine war? So that's a very important point, because you don't want to initiate a flight like this unless it's got a lot of relevant justification for why the flight took place, keeping in mind that they're flying into a war zone on a long-haul trip. So it needs a lot of fuel. It needs the correct crew complement, and the crew needs to be aware of it. So, the next question is, was there an ulterior motive?
That's the elephant in the room, I reckon. Anyway, carry on.
Yeah. So, was there an ulterior motive? For example, financial or material aid? And if one analyzes the logic behind this trip, I can't see how that group of African leaders who were perhaps trying in the best way that they could. And apparently half of them dropped out anyway, so the whole thing was falling flat even before it was initiated. And then, of course, we go on to the flight itself. Where did the breakdown lie with Italian airspace clearances? Was this a communication breakdown? If so, we now look at a sort of a trend developing behind the scenes that sets the scene for what could be a very, very dangerous situation and an accident. So that's how we look at this HFAX, the assessment and classification system. Then the 12 containers that contained weapons and ammunition, did the 12 containers contain weapons and ammunition? And if it contained ammunition, which the answer is obvious, was it in approved DG packaging? So that's a critical thing as well. The crew rest was an issue in question. Apparently the pilot was blamed, I see in some of these news reports, for delaying the flight. And then backing all of this is ICAO oversight. The International Civil Aviation Organization should be looking at all these things, including the aircraft overload, underload situation, and they should be monitoring this because South Africa is a signatory to ICAO, and there should be a big daddy approach to how these things are looked at, but that seems to be lacking in so many instances these days. So to sum up the whole situation, nothing was mentioned in the news reports with two issues. The one issue was the crew, especially the flight deck crew, would have been under excessive pressure before the flight even took off due to the nature of the flight into an active war zone. When they were told they did not have a clearance to pass through Italian airspace and were forced to orbit 6 times, this would have exacerbated the flight deck crew stress to an enormous degree. Now I'm looking at it from a pilot's cap on and pilot in command. So there's an absolute disaster with stress in the cockpit with the flight deck crew.
Right.
So, and I'll just finish off this part here. So their diversion to Chopin Airport in Warsaw was obviously based on fuel load and the nature of their destination, being Kiev in Ukraine, and all the possible ramifications that might eventuate on their arrival there. So the issue there is that the pilot in command would be now going into a low fuel or a high risk fuel situation. Now he's got to decide whether to divert or go on to Kiev. And he made the right decision by diverting because it was critical. He needed fuel and they needed to set everything up. And that is what now led to this debacle that happened there.
Now, I understand that the actual so-called trying to get peace in Ukraine was organized not by the African leaders, but by an arms dealer.
Yeah, that I've read in a lot of these reports, and that links back to my first point that I mentioned in the first instance. What was the objective of this trip?
Yeah.
Did the group realistically hope to influence or bring about changes in the Russian-Ukraine war? The other thing is to have 12 pallets of arms to provide for the support protection group that was accompanying Ramaphosa and everybody else seems to be an absolute excessive amount of weapons. Because
absolutely. I mean, not even the US president would have something that big.
No, so there are a lot of questions, and this now comes back to my issue of ICAO oversight and IATA, because have they looked into this? Have they investigated this? Because if this is a breach of dangerous goods regulations and the flight itself, Italian airspace, and apparently the names of the passengers weren't provided accurately, there were reports along those lines as well. We have a situation, and our problem is not a political or emotional issue. As I said, our issue is flight safety, And if ICAO and the authorities are overlooking these sorts of things, like the overloaded A340 incident, then things start to slip. And when things start to slip in aviation, it always ends one way. And that's what we deal with in our business with flight safety every day of our lives. And it's declining and getting worse and worse.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Now, just on that issue of the arms, there was also allegedly, this is allegedly, a huge amount of cash found in suitcases on that plane. And, that clearly is money laundering, and Ramaphosa is becoming infamous with money laundering. You look at Pala, and, he seems like he can move cash wherever he wants, and no one worries about it.
Well, that's actually very interesting, and I read that as well. And the issue there is if there was justification for it, then well and good. If it's cleared with the pre-flight documentation and the issues surrounding that. But of course, if you then look at the international requirements with the maximum amount of money you're allowed to take in or out, it's normally $10,000, or I'm not sure what it is in rands, but there'll be a figure that's set, and you're not allowed to take more than that. So, yeah. In theory, anything above that gets confiscated. Well, so why did that not happen in this case?
Well, it looks like at least a couple of million rand in the suitcases, as you can see in the photo that I'm displaying right now on the live stream. So that's a huge amount of cash, and clearly, if you've got an arms dealer who's organizing this whole thing, and you've got millions of dollars in cash, there is something going on that has absolutely no relevance to trying to get a peace deal going.
Well, I guess the inference with all of this is, and it unfortunately comes back to news reports and the validity thereof, and that is, if this was in any way related to some sort of arms deal, weapons to supply to Russia, whatever it might have been, that's allegedly what is said in the news reports. We now come back to Simonstown and the Russian vessel that came in and loaded arms to take back as well. So
the Lady R.
Yes. So all of these issues are things that normally in a normal ethical type situation would be investigated, and the investigation report would come out within a week, an interim report maybe, and then a full report later on. But of course, nothing ever comes of this. And that might seem like a trivial thing in one way. It doesn't really affect some people. But the problem is, if we now put that in an aviation safety context, we're dealing with a crisis, and it's not just South Africa, it's worldwide. There should be an approach or an approach to sort of analyze and investigate these things and corrective action implemented. Otherwise, as I said, it's just going to go into an ever-increasing downslide that leads to accidents.
Yeah, you know what I found very strange, Colin, was that his security detail stuck at Warsaw was 100 people. I mean, how can you need 100 people to protect the president?
Well, that's actually a very interesting thing, because if you keep in mind that the aircraft wasn't supposed to go there, according to some of the news reports, it was supposed to go directly to Kiev. What are 100 inexperienced support people going to do for the president or his entourage when they've got hardened soldiers, military people, hundreds of them, doing the job properly when he arrives? In other words, the 100 that Ramaphosa and whoever was taking in become absolute obsolete individuals, in that they don't know what they're doing, that they don't know the layout of the land, they don't know the threat profiles, they don't know how the whole situation works. You would normally, as all the other people that have gone in would, you might have 5 or 10 people around you, but the rest would be supplied by Zelensky and his military personnel.
Yeah, exactly. Now, I want to just move on to a very topical issue when it comes to aviation safety. And that is to do with the number of pilots in the flight deck. Traditionally, it's been 2 pilots, because if one gets sick, the other one can take over, or if, so you've got a backup. But some airlines are now talking about reducing that to just 1 pilot. What are the issues with that as far as you're concerned, Colin?
Well, from a flight safety perspective, it's the most horrifying concept that we have ever seen as a group national venture, which is not related to safety. It's purely related to money, because they don't want to have to pay additional crew. So the reports are saying that over 40 countries, including Germany, UK, New Zealand, have asked the United Nations body that sets aviation standards to help make single pilot flights a safe reality. And this has gone over to EASA, the European Aviation Safety Agency, that have said that this service could start in 2027. So that's the one aspect. If you go online and you do a search on pilot incapacitation airline, they happen virtually every week. There's an incapacitation incident where they either become totally incapacitated or partially or psychologically incapacitated, like the Garuda accident that we investigated, where the pilot in command was on a fuel bonus, incentive bonus, and for the approach into Yogyakarta, he got locked into the approach because he was simply thinking of how much money he would lose if he had to overshoot and go around, because his approach was too fast, something like 240 knots when it should have been 150 or 160 at the most. So there are those issues that are absolutely critical. Now, one also has to look at this to be balanced and realistic. Flight safety and myself, I'm part of the Civil Aviation Safety Authority working group over here with a new set of regulations called Part 139V for eVTOL electric helicopters and vertiports.
Okay, we'll talk about that separately. What
Yes.
I actually want to do right now, Colin, is play that video clip I told you about. It lasts for about 3 minutes. Once it's played, I'll let you know. So if you can just mute your audio just while I'm playing it. Here we go.
Okay, I'm standing by.
Okay. All right, guys. This is a video where basically the airline pilots are discussing this whole issue of pilot safety. Let's listen to that. Sorry, that's not the one I want. I want the shorter one. Here we are, this one here. There we go. Let me play that.
We spent decades making aviation the safest mode of transport in the world.
Training, checking, incident reporting, regulatory oversight, and most importantly, a team of 2 skilled professional pilots at the control. All these contribute to the safe takeoff, flight, and landing of hundreds of thousands of flights every day.
Millions of passengers and cargo worldwide safely reach their destinations because skilled pilots are on the flight deck operating the aircraft.
Unfortunately, your safety may all be in jeopardy because some airlines and aircraft manufacturers want to remove the most important safety feature on any airplane, its pilots. That's a bad idea that simply won't fly.
Every aspect of the safety of your flight is deliberately designed for a team working together on the flight deck. The aircraft, its systems, the regulation and standards that apply to the flight, and the procedures the pilots follow. All this is at least a two-person job.
Automation is an important element of our jobs, but automation requires pilots to use and manage it correctly, and it's certainly no substitute for pilots.
No matter what airline CEOs, airplane manufacturers, and others want you to believe, commercial aircraft can't fly safely without pilots. And we won't allow them to undermine the safest mode of transportation in the world.
Complex decision-making and contingency responses require human pilots, not computers, to ensure your safety during flights.
A 2017 study by NASA lays out the unacceptable safety risk posed by single-pilot flight operations, especially during abnormal or emergency events.
But that hasn't stopped airline companies and manufacturers from lobbying governments and regulators to reduce the number of pilots required on the flight deck.
This initiative is not solving a safety problem. It is going to create one. It dismisses lessons the global airline industry has learned since its inception. And it threatens your safety and the safety of our skies.
They are placing a higher value on profit than on your safety, and pilots across the globe are going to fight to stop them.
This proposal is counter to and fails to recognize our incredible safety record. The safety of our passengers and cargo is our common goal, and your safety requires at least 2 qualified and experienced airline pilots on the flight deck at all times.
All right, there we go. I'll just get rid of that and we'll get Colin back. Okay, Colin, I've just played that little video clip. Now, one of the things that I can't believe is, as you mentioned, if there's a health issue with just one pilot on the flight deck, he's locked in from the inside, isn't he? So the other crew can't get to him.
Well, there won't be any other crew because there'll only be one pilot. If it's a long-haul flight, they might have a standby pilot, but there'll only be one pilot at the controls. The concept is to try and develop the aircraft so that they can be flown single pilot. But the problem is, for redundancy, if that pilot becomes incapacitated, do they have the remote means to control that aircraft and bring it into land? So to get this right, they're going to have a secondary system that it can be taken over from the ground, which I don't see happening in a long time. And you've also then got the problems with, if that system fails, then you've got nothing.
Okay, now just let's unpack what you've just said. What you've just said is that there's no plan B. You've basically got the only option of it being brought in to land remotely. That's the only option you're left with.
That's correct, and that is an issue that's complex, and as I mentioned, it links back in. We can talk about that in a minute, into this eVTOL helicopter situation, which is coming in globally, where the idea is to have these electric helicopters that are going to be flown initially with a pilot, then with no pilot during daylight hours only, and then they bring it in for night instrument meteorological conditions where they're going to have no pilot, and these electric air taxis are going to operate night and day with no pilot, run by artificial intelligence and digital systems. So what they're trying to do is to bring it in to the airline operations as well.
We'll get to that in a second. I just want to keep on with the single pilot situation. I think what people need to understand is, because of what happened at 9/11, pilots, when they go into the flight deck where they actually all the controls are, they actually lock that door so the crew can't actually get in. Nobody can get into where the pilots are. It's locked from the inside. Now,
that's exactly right, yes.
Now, if you've only got one pilot and he has, let's say, a heart attack, the crew can't even go in to help him because he's locked in from the inside.
That's correct.
So it's not just the entire group of passengers on the plane who are at risk, but the pilot, obviously, because if he has a major event, he's probably going to die because he's not able to get up out of the seat, open the door, get someone in to help him. He's incapacitated. So you're talking about lives here. And I think the worst possible thing, I fly a lot, but I think the worst possible thing that could ever happen on a flight is one of the crew saying, "We're terribly sorry, but our pilot has died. We don't have a backup pilot, so they're now going to try and bring us in remotely." I mean, how would passengers react to that situation?
Well, let's add another ingredient into it. Say the single pilot is at the controls and they've got all the electronic systems in place and they've got a backup remotely operated system that might theoretically work all right, of course, which is full of theoretical question marks. But what happens if the pilot has a fit and he's kicking and he has an epileptic fits, for example?
Oh, wow. And he starts knocking the controls. Exactly.
Wow. And he might have his, if he's en route, he's probably going to undo his shoulder harness just for ease of, from a comfort point of view, which is what happens. And then he goes out of control and he's kicking the controls, and then the remotely operated system fails anyway.
Wow. So in that situation, you got rather like what happened to that Malaysian airline, which just flew forever and then just fell into the sea because it ran out of petrol.
Yes.
That's the sort of outcome we could be talking about.
Well, except I think in that case, he was in control when it ran out of fuel, and he deliberately flew it into the ocean. In this case, it'll run out of fuel, and the same thing will happen anyway, because if it's on autopilot, it'll just carry on losing height because it's got no power, and then go into the ground or into the sea.
Just last week we had that horrific situation with that deep sea underwater vehicle, the Titan, which was going to have a look at the Titanic, and you had those 5 people on board. And yes, there was talk that they had 96 hours of oxygen to sustain them, but apparently the thing blew up, so they died very quickly. But during that period, I was just imagining what it would be like to be in a situation you had no control of, where you knew you were going to die. And that would be the most horrible situation anybody could land up in.
And you're right. It's an exact parallel of an airliner in that situation as well, where there's no hope and you just sit there until the end comes.
That's horrible. Well, I think that's going to have a huge dent on air travel. I think a lot of people, if they know there's only one pilot on the plane, will just not fly anymore.
Well, there'll be some people that don't understand the implications and the risk, although they'll be few and far between. But anybody with any aviation knowledge will be very, very wary of that. And there's a lot of people that do understand aviation, and they are not going to fly with that potential latent risk.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, the whole safety standards when it comes to aviation just seem to be going into a ball of shit. And you were talking about VTOL aircraft, and VTOL aircraft are basically planes that don't have crew. They just take off remotely, and they fly you to your location. I know, for example, that Amazon are now using these little drones to take packages and deliver them to people's doors.
Yes.
So they've got that sort of technology running, but those things go wrong as well. They get caught up in electricity lines, and they're not perfect. Now, with a VTOL aircraft, tell us how this works.
Well, most people don't understand how far advanced this is. You've got companies like Airbus who have already developed a modular system where they've got a vehicle on the ground that can seat 4-6 people maybe, and they've got a eVTOL helicopter, electric helicopter, that can come in and hover over the modular vehicle, and without stopping, turning its power off, it can actually pick up the module and then fly away and then put it somewhere else. And so that's the most advanced development that's coming in. But there are already there are many operators like Boeing who've developed these electric helicopters in view of the fact that it's going to be an absolutely massive inflow and influx. In fact, our first eVTOL helicopter is actually going into Brisbane and is going to be displayed there. And then in Victoria, where I am in Melbourne, they're coming in here. So there are two issues. One is the creation of the regulations that I'm part of with the Civil Aviation Safety Authority and another 19 people that have been picked for this exercise. And the other aspect is vertiports, in other words, where these helicopters are going to land. So they're going to be on top of buildings, open spaces everywhere. So there's massive requirement to identify, inspect, create those vertiports, but also from the eVTOL helicopter point of view, because they're imminent and they're coming in, this whole scene has actually, I believe, gone out of control, because it should be something that's set up safely before any operations begin. But what we know here is that the operations are going to be forced into quickly created regulations because they're not going to be ready on time.
So what we're saying, Colin, is that in, let's say, 10 years' time, just as a timeline, there won't be any pilots. You'll be getting into a vehicle that is run by artificial intelligence, and there probably won't be any crew, and the airlines will be making huge profits, and if something goes wrong, oh, well, that's just tough.
Yeah, that's right. And the issue is, what they're trying to get around is the issue with commercial charter flying, in terms of not having it not being classified as a commercial operation. But of course, the passengers are going to be paying passengers, and as soon as money changes hands and there's invoicing and there's tickets, then it becomes a commercial operation. So that's one of the things that we've brought in as a critical issue, because what some of the people are trying to do is to bypass the commercial side and operate it as a private sort of organization, which it cannot be. It has to be a commercially orientated operation.
Wow. Now, what sort of timeline? You mentioned 2027. Is that for one pilot in the flight deck, or is that for pilotless operation of planes?
That's for single pilot airline operations.
2027.
2027.
So that can be an Airbus. It can be anything.
Yes.
Wow.
And they will quickly convert the aircraft. They'll already be working on it to convert it to a so-called single pilot operation, to actually cover what they're trying to implement.
Now, there's one thing I can't get my head around here, Colin, and that is that when I get on a plane and I'm flying, let's say, from Brisbane to Johannesburg, obviously I've got to stop in Perth, for example, but during the flight, the crew come around and they give you breakfast and they give you snacks and drinks and stuff like that. If they're going to get rid of one of the pilots, are they going to get rid of their crew on board as well?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because if one looks even further ahead, they're going to have, they won't have humans, they'll have robots. Like, we see in these hospitals that we've got over here in Australia and globally, where everything has become automated with robots, like the Royal Adelaide Hospital, for example. Most of the operations with ward, meals, linen, everything else is all done by robots that run back and forth.
Wow, I hadn't realized that.
No, it's absolutely amazing to see, because these robots run back and forth. They've got their own lifts. they go into the lifts, they go down, they're pre-programmed, they pick up meals, they go back to the wards, they take the meals off, it goes back to a charging station if necessary. The whole thing is automated, I would say about 80% through and through with the ward requirements and that sort of thing.
But, you know, what happens if the patient lying in the bed has, let's say, a peanut allergy and she sees that the food that's been delivered has got peanuts? How does she say to the robot, hey, I can't eat that?
Well, in theory, that's where the artificial intelligence and the whole process comes into play, because all of that is pre-programmed. So if there is a patient with a diet requirement or anything like that, or an allergy, then it's all built into the AI system, and it's supposedly foolproof, just like single pilot operations with the backup system.
Yeah. Well, look, that just sounds absolutely crazy. Anyway, look, there are three phases of this roll-in of the pilotless planes. Phase one is one passenger carrying with pilots with visual flight conditions.
Yes.
Phase two is passenger carrying without pilot, day visual flight conditions. And then
That's correct.
phase three is passenger carrying without pilots, day or night, in instrument meteorological conditions.
Which is any weather. In other words, they can fly in cloud, which means that their approach to a vertiport has to be controlled like an instrument approach with a normal aircraft or a helicopter. It has to have an instrument approach where the eVTOL electric helicopter will go in and land electronically.
Well, look, I had one flight that I've never forgotten. It was the scariest flight I've ever been on. I was flying from Cairns to Brisbane, and when they were coming in to land in Brisbane, you couldn't actually see the city because there was this thick cloud all over the city, right across the whole region. And they came in, you know, through their normal way of landing, but when they were about 5 meters from or above the actual landing track, the pilots still couldn't see the landing strip, and the pilot said, we're aborting this landing, and all of a sudden he just pulled it up and took us out of the cloud back into the air, and we landed at the Sunshine Coast. Now, if you've got no pilot on board, how is AI going to handle a situation like that?
Well, it would obviously work on an auto land system like airliners have got, but then you've got to have the ground station as well. So the auto land system will actually take it down to zero height and automatically land the aircraft. That's what they would have in mind to sort that out.
But that would be incredibly scary for all the passengers.
Well, they wouldn't even know until the undercarriage goes down and they bump on the ground. They wouldn't even know what was going on.
Well, I mean, they would know looking out their portholes so you can't see anything.
Yeah, but that's quite common in IMC conditions, because remember that a horizontal side view, lateral view, is different to the crew, who have a sort of forward vision look at everything as well. And on the descent with the nose down, they've got a better look at everything that's coming up.
Yeah, yeah. Wow. So in your view, and you're a top expert in aviation, in your view, the safety standards of aviation in the commercial area, we're talking about passenger planes, we're talking about cargo planes, that is being kicked to the curb because of money.
Well, sadly, it's not just that. The whole approach to everything in life has become commercially orientated. What we knew when we were young as ethics and things being done honestly in the right way, look at the American political system, for example,
yeah.
and look at various things and the way that they sort of deteriorated. It is, and then put that overlay onto aviation, which is a much higher risk area than sort of working out some of the political issues that are not as high risk because it's not aviation. And we've got that's what we're worried about, and that's what we're seeing every day of our lives in terms of commercial overriding safety. So the old definition of cost versus safety and knowing where that line is to get the right balance is now falling away completely.
Now, Colin, take the hypothetical situation where they roll forward with this new way where there's no pilots on board and passengers just have to hope that they get to the other end. And let's just take a situation hypothetically where suddenly they have, let's say, 10 planes crashing a week because of what they've done. Is there any way they can return back to the safer option, or are they stuck with what they've got?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, because the only way they could revert back is to put another pilot on board. And if there was another pilot on board, now you've got another situation with the electronics and the backup system, which they would be able to do that. They'd have to then be able to switch that system off and go back to the old historic two-crew operation. But they would, I think they would have to build that into the developmental process to have that option if it did become a problem.
Wow. Okay. Colin, I'm going to wrap up this live stream shortly. First of all, I want to say thank you so much for getting up at this ungodly hour. I mean, you're in Australia, so you know what time it is. It must be getting close to 5 o'clock in the morning, and you've been up since 3:30 for this live stream, and I just want to say thank you so much for doing that.
No, that's a pleasure, and thank you for the invitation, and greetings to all your viewers. Thank you very much indeed.
Well, before you go, is there a final message you'd like to give people about aviation and your views as to where it's going?
Well, I think somebody needs to monitor and control the decline. And the decline is now diagnosed and is obvious, and we see it every day with multiple areas of operations in aviation. And it now comes back to ICAO, this International Civil Aviation Organization, as to how they monitor and how they are exerting their control. And the problem is that what we see is that there's possibly, allegedly, or might be, a decline in that oversight efficiency. For example, that overloaded aircraft, SAA, that should have been immediately investigated from ICAO side, because there were so many failings and failures in that area that relate to ICAO and the overall safety, that it should have been handled more efficiently from their side.
Right. Okay, so what you're saying is that the old safety standards of the 80s and 90s seem to be pushed out the window now.
Exactly. It's declining, right, without any doubt.
Okay. What's your advice to people who are considering flying in the future when they start moving down to one pilot?
I would wait at least 12 months before I flew. And even after 12 months, I would reconsider the logic of flying in a single pilot operation, simply because of all those issues that we've covered now in the last hour.
Right. Okay. And when it comes to pilotless planes, well then, obviously you just don't fly.
Well, that's a whole new dimension, because that's going to rely on electronics, digital, internet failures, electrical failures. They would have backup systems, obviously, and generators, but it's so undeveloped that there's a massive amount of work that needs to be put into place to bring in even a reasonable level of safety.
Well, if you think of bird strikes, I mean, how would an AI deal with that?
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. Colin, thank you so much for joining us. And look, we'll have a chat again in the future. Always good chatting to you. And Say hi to Johann for me. I'm sorry that he had Skype issues, but you know, we've certainly gone through what we needed to discuss.
Thank you, Scott. It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Okay, take care, mate.
Thanks, eh?
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. All right, guys, that was Colin Weir from Flight Safety, and you'll see the link to his website down below this video. Please remember, tomorrow night, 8 p.m. Johannesburg time, we've got another live stream, and we're going to be talking about a very, very relevant and topical issue. We're going to be talking about water quality at, well, they don't have any drinking water in Ugu, but we're going to be talking to several people from the Ugu municipality about the absolute disaster happening with their water, despite the fact they've got this Umzimkulu River, which is absolutely perfect for water delivery. It just shows what a complete and utter mess the ANC government are. Thanks to the mods for looking after the side chat, and I'm going to wrap up with tonight, Hier bly ek boer. Have a good night, and see you tomorrow night, 8 p.m. Johannesburg time.
Meer as 61,000 van ons voorvaders het op die grens vir ons gesterwe, sodat ons vry kan wees. Die is my land, die is my reg. Hier is ek boer. Van stof is ek gemaak en sal ek terugkeer. Die Bybel is die woord waaruit ek leer, soos die grond op die aarde. Hier bly ek boer. Soos 'n dief in die nag sal die vyand kom, maar hier bly ek staan en ek draai nie om, want jy maak my nie bang nie. Hier bly ek boer. Die is my land waarvoor ek sal veg. Die is my bloed, my sweet, my reg. Die is die plek waar my voorvaders leef. Die is my land, hoor wat ek jou sê. Die is my land, wat my mense voor. Hier bly ek boer. Soos 'n blaassam in die somer wat vreugde bring. My oupa wat Manikiro kon sing, soos hy stap deur die lande. Hier was hy boer. My wortels lê diep in die grond geplant. My seun soos my pa los ek vir jou die land, en jy hoef nie te vrees nie. Hier sal jy boer. My land waarvoor ek sal veg. Die is my bloed, my sweet, my reg. Die is die plek waar my voorvaders leef. Die is my land, hoor wat ek jou sê. Die is my land, wat my mense voor. Hier bly ek boer. Die sal kom. Sal kom, die leeu 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 sal kom.